book, and they went from that to talking about the Saturday morning cartoon to the 3D cartoon, the huge move the franchise made to turn it into a film for the first time in 2002. The cast members talked about the original films, what's going to be different about The Amazing Spider-Man, and they really made the most out of a 22-minute production without commercials. It was hosted by Paul McGuire, who hosts CMT's The Show, and Rosie Etta, and they did a fantastic job getting us ready for The Amazing Spider-Man coming out on July 3rd, 2012. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've always been a Spider-Man fan, and the thing that really jumped out at me about this film is that it's being released 50 years to the day of the release of the original comic. As I mentioned here earlier, edition 688 of that comic will drop in comic book stores next week, and I'm sure everybody's excited about that. They have a video game called The Amazing Spider-Man coming out in anticipation of the theatrical release. And with the debut of the Lizard as a Spider-Man villain in this film, that is one thing that really makes me want to see this film more than any other Spider-Man film that has previously been released over the last 10 years. In 2002, the first Spider-Man film had the Green Goblin. In 2004, the Spider-Man film had Doc Ock. And in 2007, we had two villains, the Sandman and Venom, which Topher Grace actually portrayed. So I think that this villain is going to be what fans have been asking for years. Fans of the Spider-Man franchise have been asking, when are we going to see the Lizard? When are we going to see Scorpion? When are we going to see Electro? We're finally going to get that with the debut of the Lizard. And the guy who portrays the Lizard actually looks so like the legitimate comic book character. It is absolutely unbelievable. The only glimpses we have gotten of the Lizard have been from comic books and a couple of animated editions of Spider-Man's cartoon, both animated and 3D-like. We've never ever seen a villain portrayed quite like the Lizard in a Spider-Man film. And the thing that was said back in about 2002, 2003, that if they ever were to create the Lizard for a Spider-Man film, he would have to be computer generated. And a certain portion of the Lizard character is computer generated, along with a lot of the web action in the film that you'll see. But the visuals in this film are absolutely astonishing. What I got of it, I only got a glimpse of it from The Amazing Spider-Man Unmasked, but the visuals look so much more detailed since the original Spider-Man films were released. And the thing that you have to take into consideration too is that graphical presentation has really improved since the release of the first Spider-Man film in 2002. And even back then, theaters sold out with the release of the original Spider-Man film because the anticipated release of the original Spider-Man films was incredible. I remember seeing the original Spider-Man film back in 2002, the same time the Scorpion King was released, and absolutely being mind-blown by the visual effects. So you can only imagine how much more the visual effects are going to mind-blow you with the release of The Amazing Spider-Man. The visuals look absolutely astonishing. You're going to have to take my word for it and see it with your own eyes. You will not believe how much the visual effects jump out at you with this film. I am really, really excited for the release of this film. I am more excited about the release of this film than I have been for anything having to do with Spider-Man over the last number of years, even more so since seeing The Amazing Spider-Man Unmasked. I told you to check this show out on a previous documentation of the release of The Amazing Spider-Man when we were just being skeptical on the release of The Amazing Spider-Man. We were wondering what the villain was going to be, what the story was going to be, and I mentioned that it seemed like it was just a retelling of the original story 10 years after the original film had been released with a new cast and a new director. And it really is, it's kind of half and half. After seeing The Amazing Spider-Man Unmasked, it's a retelling of the original story with a bit of additional information, some information we didn't get with the original films 1 through 3. We're going to get a bit of history between himself and his parents, which is always good when it comes to a superhero movie, because we get to find out where the superhero came from. The best example I can use of that is how we found out about the history between Batman and his parents, how Batman's parents were shot outside of an opera house with the release of Batman Begins in 2006, which was a phenomenal decision for DC Comics and Warner Brothers to make, to release the film on how Batman really got his legacy started. And we go from there. Batman makes the decision after the death of his parents to avenge the death of them by avenging, crime and avenging the city of all wrongdoings. And over the last 60 to 75 years, Batman has established himself as an icon since the 1940s. It's been 50 years since the release of the Amazing Spider-Man comics, and Spider-Man has done the same, appearing on everything from pajamas to lunchboxes to having his own action figure. Spider-Man has established himself as one of the greatest of all time, and the debate on what superhero is the greatest of all time will be a debate that will never cease. Long after I'm dead and gone, and a lot of other radio shows, columnists, and fans of the Spider-Man franchise and superheroes, they'll still be debating on just who is the greatest superhero of all time, and even superheroes to come in the future will be in debate as well. What would have ever happened if superheroes from 2025 ever clashed with superheroes from the 1960s, such as Batman and the Amazing Spider-Man? Spider-Man was always one of my favorites. I guess it was just the way Spider-Man portrayed himself and conducted himself. His arrogance was something from the original cartoons that really jumped out at me. Pete Souls did a fantastic job with his, sarcasm, his comical relief, and since then, nobody's really been able ever to top the original voice of Spider-Man. I think that Spider-Man is just his arrogance and the way he conducted himself. Was always something that jumped out at me, and just the visuals for the movies were absolutely incredible. And the visuals for this one makes me want to see this Spider-Man film more than I've wanted to see any other Spider-Man film from the past. So I'm definitely going to be checking this one out. Just to put this into perspective for you, how highly anticipated this film is, the previous three editions of the Spider-Man films from 2002 to 2007, Spider-Man 1 through 3, generated a combination of over $2 billion, which is a lot of money for three films to drag in over 10 years. $2 billion. Can you imagine if you had that much? From 2002 to 2007, the Spider-Man films take in $2 billion, and I would venture to say that this one is probably going to double that, and probably by the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to drop in theaters on May 2nd, 2014, that film will probably have taken in anywhere from $4 to $5 billion. That is what I am predicting for the release of The Amazing Spider-Man. Of course, Spider-Man has accomplished a lot, both animatedly, for a Saturday morning cartoon and a film, and I'm really looking forward to finding out what the cash flow is, what kind of attention this film gets, and what kind of reviews are given out upon the first few weeks of its release. It's definitely going to dominate in the box office. I'm predicting it's going to take over the top position and remain in the top position for probably the entire month that it's out. But the thing that you also have to remember too is that it comes out the same month that Batman The Dark Knight Rises is released theatrically, so it's probably going to be a battle between Batman and Spider-Man for the top position in the box office, but both films will have an extensive amount of time to dominate the top position. It's not going to be a case where a children's movie dominates for 1 week. If Spider-Man or Batman makes it into the top position, they will remain in the top position for about a month. But I'm predicting a consistent battle between Batman and Spider-Man for the top position in the box office, and definitely both DC and Marvel Comics will spend on Spider-Man. Promotionally wise, advertiser wise, they will draw you in to see this movie whatever way they can. The key things about this film that really jumps out at me is the new cast. I mentioned here earlier on in the show how Andrew Garfield, the British actor who's won a couple of awards for his supporting role in The Social Network and other films that he's been in, the key thing here is it's a British actor, and along with that there's an entirely different cast who enjoyed working together. But that's the thing, and the thing about this cast is the cast members look more like the comic book characters than the original cast of the original Spider-Man films 1 through 3 from 2002 to 2007. They look more like the comic book characters, and it seemed like they really got into their roles for the film. So that's one thing that I'm really excited about, and I'm really excited about the history lesson we're going to get between Spider-Man and his parents, because a history lesson between a superhero and his parents is something that should be included with every superhero movie. It's left out from time to time, but with history lessons being given for superheroes like the Hulk and Batman in the past, a history lesson between Spider-Man and his parents is something that seemingly has always been left out of a Spider-Man film. So at least we're getting that. We're getting some of the questions that were left unanswered from 2007 Spider-Man film that had such a confusing ending. If anything, it really had a confusing ending, because we were wondering, how in the hell does this film actually end? Does he end up with Mary Jane? Does he eventually end up marrying her? Do they go their separate ways? I was left with a lot of questions with that film, so we're finally getting those questions answered, which is something I give Mark Webb a phenomenal amount of credit for, along with a lot of other things that I give Mark Webb a lot of credit for. I give him a lot of credit for having to put up with the likes of Maroon 5 and Green Day producing their music videos. Must have been a fucking hell. But this is a huge responsibility for him to take on. He's made a lot of executive decisions, and he's made a lot of better decisions than Sam Raimi. Man, I can't imagine why Tobey Maguire wouldn't want to work with Mark Webb. Because it seems like Mark Webb really has his head in the right place and knows what he's doing. And it seems like he's a fan of Spider-Man. He mentioned that he was a fan of the Lizard, and he was a fan of a couple of aspects of the original Spider-Man comics and the original Spider-Man movies and different things. Something that I never heard Sam Raimi say in any interview he did or any interview that any of the cast members did. It didn't seem like Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire were fans of the original Spider-Man, comic book or the actual cartoon. But it seems like the director and the cast members are really into this, really into their roles and really into their jobs. So I think that this film has everything in the right place, and I think that it's going to be one of the most successful films that the Spider-Man franchise has released in the previous three. By 2014, we will have 5 Spider-Man films, and I am envisioning a debate on who portrayed Spider-Man more effectively. Will it indeed be the all-American Tobey Maguire or the all-British Andrew Garfield, who has won a lot of awards for a lot of supporting roles in a lot of Hollywood films? One of his most known supporting roles came in The Social Network, which was an in-depth look on the life story of Mark Zuckerberg, the creator of Facebook. They have a Facebook and a Twitter, by the way, for the Amazing Spider-Man and Marvel comics. You just got to go to twitter.com and facebook.com for additional information on that. But $2 billion is a different